This is probably the biggest screw-up of my life. The kind of mistake that doesn't just haunt you for a few weeks or months, it follows you around for decades. Although, calling it a mistake feels weird now. At the time, though, yeah, it felt like my entire life had just been flipped upside down. I'm 23 years old, and my best friend is 22. We've known each other for so long that I honestly can't remember a time when she wasn't part of my life. We grew up together. Not in the we met in high school and became friends kind of way. I mean genuinely grew up together. Our parents were friends, our families knew each other, and we spent most of our childhood running around outside causing trouble. We built terrible tree forts, rode bikes until sunset, and spent entire summers convincing ourselves we were going to become famous athletes, actors, or whatever dream we had that week. As we got older, nothing really changed. We went to different schools at times, had different friend groups, dated different people, but somehow we always stayed close. When people asked if we were dating, we'd laugh. She was basically the sister I never had. At least that's what I told everyone. Looking back, I'm starting to think I might have been the last person to realize what was actually going on. Anyway, a few months ago I was hanging out at her apartment. Nothing unusual. We'd done that thousands of times before. We ordered food, watched movies, and drank way more alcohol than either of us should have. By midnight, we were both completely wasted. The details are honestly kind of blurry. What I do remember is that one minute we were sitting on the couch making fun of some terrible reality TV show, and the next minute we were kissing. And then one thing led to another. The next morning was awkward. Not horrible, just weird. We both kind of sat there pretending nothing happened while simultaneously thinking about nothing else. Eventually, she laughed and said, "So, that happened." I laughed too. Then we agreed we'd just move on and pretend it never happened. That plan lasted about 4 days, because it happened again, and then again, and then again. Before either of us realized it, we'd somehow developed a routine, a very adult routine. Neither of us ever sat down and had the "what are we" conversation. We just kept acting like best friends while occasionally sleeping together. Honestly, it was the most confusing arrangement imaginable. Then everything changed. One afternoon she called me. I immediately knew something was wrong. Her voice sounded strange, nervous, quiet, the kind of voice people use when they're about to tell you something life-changing. She asked if I could come over. When I got there, she was sitting at the kitchen table. In front of her were 5 pregnancy tests. 5. Every single one positive. I remember staring at them for what felt like an eternity. Then I looked at her, then back at the tests, then back at her. Neither of us said anything. My brain completely stopped functioning. Finally, I managed to ask, "Are those yours?" Which is probably the dumbest question I've ever asked in my life. She nodded. I sat down. Silence. More silence. Then she quietly said, "I already made an appointment with my gynecologist." A week later, the doctor confirmed it. She was pregnant. And just like that, our entire future changed. The weird part was that neither of us panicked. I expected panic. I expected screaming. I expected a complete emotional breakdown. Instead, we just sat there discussing practical things, finances, living situations, jobs, the baby. We were both financially stable enough to make it work. Not comfortably, not easily, but possible. The biggest surprise was realizing neither of us wanted an abortion. The option was there, we talked about it, but neither of us could bring ourselves to do it. So the decision was made. We were having a baby. Then came the terrifying part, telling our parents. Her grandmother had been joking for years that we'd eventually end up together. Nobody took her seriously. Turns out she was apparently the smartest person in both families. When we finally sat down with her parents, I thought I was going to throw up. Her dad was outside gardening. Her mom was cleaning. We spent almost 30 minutes trying to build up the courage. Finally, everyone gathered in the kitchen. My heart felt like it was trying to escape through my chest. I looked at her. She looked at me. Then we told them. The silence afterward was brutal. Her mom immediately started crying. Her dad looked like somebody had just informed him the moon was falling from the sky. Then came the question that absolutely destroyed us. "So, when did you two start dating?" Silence. Neither of us answered. Because, technically, we weren't. At least not officially. The awkwardness was unbearable. Eventually, her dad laughed. Not because it was funny, more because the situation was so ridiculous. We spent the next hour answering questions. Then we called her grandmother. The first thing she said was, "I knew it." She was way too happy about the entire thing. After leaving her parents' house, we sat quietly in the car. I felt emotionally exhausted. Then she reached over and kissed me. A small kiss, nothing dramatic. Then she smiled. "I'm proud of you." The entire drive home, her hand rested on my thigh. And suddenly I found myself wondering something that should have occurred to me years ago. Did she actually like me? Like me? I didn't know. And honestly, I was terrified to ask. What if I was imagining things? What if I ruined everything? But eventually we talked, really talked, for hours, about us, about our future, about the baby, about everything we'd spent years avoiding. That's when we both admitted it. We'd had feelings for each other for a very long time. Neither of us wanted to risk ruining the friendship, so we stayed silent. For years. Turns out we were both idiots. A few months later, we moved in together. Financially, it was rough. Some months were genuinely stressful. Babies are expensive. Apartments are expensive. Life is expensive. But somehow we made it work. Then the day finally came. The day our daughter was born. The moment I held her for the first time completely changed me. Everything else disappeared. The stress, the fear, the uncertainty, all of it. I just stared at this tiny little human and realized I loved her more than anything I'd ever loved before. And when I looked over at my best friend, the woman I'd spent almost my entire life with, I realized something else. I wasn't losing my freedom. I wasn't ruining my future. I was building one. Today, we're still together, still best friends, still figuring things out one day at a time. Money can still be tight. Life can still be chaotic. Parenting is definitely harder than either of us expected. But every night when I look at our daughter sleeping and see the woman I've loved for years beside me, I realize something. The biggest mistake of my life turned out to be the best thing that ever happened. So, long story short, my girlfriend is getting her driver's license next week, which means my days of being her personal chauffeur are almost over. Until then, I've been picking her up, bringing her to my place, and driving her back home. The round trip is about 40 minutes, and since I genuinely enjoy spending time with her, I never really minded. A couple of nights ago, I dropped her off around midnight. I had work at 6 a.m. the next morning, and my workplace happens to be just a few minutes away from her house. She suggested I stay the night instead of driving all the way home and then turning around a few hours later. It made sense, so I agreed. The next morning I was half asleep when I felt her get out of bed. Through my sleep-induced fog, I heard her mention that she was going to take a shower. I mumbled something that probably wasn't even English and rolled over, pretending I was going back to sleep. A few minutes later, I had what I thought was a brilliant idea. My girlfriend and I have a habit of joking around and trying to scare each other whenever the opportunity presents itself. So I figured I'd sneak into the bathroom and surprise her while she was in the shower. In my sleepy brain, this seemed absolutely hilarious. I quietly got out of bed and tiptoed toward the bathroom. I could hear someone humming from inside the shower. Perfect. Without thinking twice, I opened the shower curtain and loudly yelled, "Surprise!" The humming immediately stopped. Then came a scream. Not just a scream, a full-volume, horror movie-level scream that nearly sent my soul into orbit. For a split second, my brain completely shut down. I stared. She stared. And then reality hit me like a freight train. It wasn't my girlfriend. It was her sister. Time froze. My mind was desperately trying to process how every decision I'd made over the last 30 seconds had led me to this exact moment. Her sister was staring at me in complete shock. I was staring back in complete horror. Neither of us had any idea what to do. Finally, my survival instincts kicked in. I yelled, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry!" Turned around and practically sprinted out of the bathroom. I found my girlfriend standing in the kitchen looking completely confused after hearing the scream. I was still trying to form coherent sentences while explaining what had just happened. The moment she realized what happened, she completely lost it. She laughed so hard she had to lean against the counter. Meanwhile, I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me whole. The rest of the morning was one of the most awkward experiences of my life. Her sister avoided eye contact. I avoided eye contact. At one point, we accidentally walked into the same room, immediately noticed each other, and both turned around and walked away like two NPCs with broken programming. My girlfriend, of course, found the entire situation hilarious and kept bringing it up every chance she got. Remember when you accidentally tried to scare my sister? Yes. Yes, I do. I remember every second of it. It's been a few days now, and while things have calmed down, her sister and I still haven't had a proper conversation since the incident. Every interaction consists of a quick nod before one of us finds a reason to leave the room. I'm hoping enough time passes that this eventually becomes a funny story everyone laughs about. Right now, though, I'm pretty sure my soul leaves my body every time I hear someone mention the word shower. This happened last night, and I'm still cringing every time I think about it. My husband, on the other hand, has been laughing nonstop ever since. For context, we're parents of a young child, which means alone time is basically a myth. Between work, parenting, laundry, cleaning, and trying to remember what sleep feels like, our lives have become a constant cycle of responsibility. So when my mother-in-law offered to babysit overnight, it felt like we'd won the lottery. A whole night to ourselves. No baby monitor. No midnight wake-ups. No cartoons playing in the background. Just freedom. Naturally, we decided to make the most of it. That evening, we headed over to a friend's house for a barbecue. There was good food, a bonfire, drinks, and the kind of conversations that only happen when adults have been sitting around a fire for several hours. At some point, the conversation took the inevitable turn toward relationships, embarrassing stories, and personal experiences. One of my friends casually mentioned something that caught my attention. Apparently, she used the shower head for more than just showering. The other women immediately understood what she meant. I sat there completely confused. Everyone started sharing stories and laughing while I quietly realized that at 35 years old, I had somehow missed this piece of information. Don't get me wrong, I'm not exactly inexperienced. I own a few toys. I'm comfortable with my body. But somehow, the idea of using a shower head for anything other than washing myself had never crossed my mind. The topic eventually moved on, but the idea remained firmly planted in my head. Hours later, after the barbecue ended, my husband and I headed home. We'd had a few drinks, so we called an Uber. By the time we got home, we both smelled like smoke from the bonfire. "I need a shower," I announced. My husband yawned. "I need sleep." And with that, he disappeared into the bedroom. I headed into the bathroom. At first, everything was completely normal. I washed my hair. I washed off the smell of smoke. I enjoyed the hot water. Then, I remembered the conversation. The curiosity got the better of me. I figured I'd see what all the fuss was about. What could possibly go wrong? Famous last words. A few moments later, I was standing there thinking that maybe my friends weren't completely crazy after all. The warm water was relaxing. I was enjoying myself. Everything seemed perfectly fine. Then, in a split second, my entire life became a slapstick comedy. Right at the worst possible moment, my foot slipped. Not a small slip. Not the kind where you quickly regain your balance. No. The kind where your brain immediately realizes disaster is coming, but your body has already committed to the fall. Time slowed down. My leg shot sideways. My balance vanished. And suddenly, I was flying. The next thing I remember was a loud crash. An incredibly loud crash, followed by another crash, then pain, then confusion. then absolute horror. I had somehow launched myself directly into the glass shower screen. The screen shattered. Glass went everywhere. I stumbled out of the shower and somehow ended up stretched awkwardly between the shower and the toilet, in a position that should probably never be physically possible. Water was still spraying. Glass covered the floor. My arm hurt. My foot hurt. And I was trying to process what had just happened. Then the bathroom door burst open. My husband had heard the noise and came running. The expression on his face is something I'll never forget. First came concern, then confusion, then realization, then laughter. Uncontrollable laughter. The man actually had to grab the wall to stop himself from falling over. There I was, injured, soaked, embarrassed beyond belief, and looking like I'd somehow lost a fight against the entire bathroom. And he couldn't stop laughing. To be fair, if the roles were reversed, I probably would have laughed too. Eventually, he helped me up. Thankfully, the injuries weren't too serious. A few cuts on my arm, a few cuts on my feet, some blood, a lot of embarrassment. We decided it was probably smart to get checked out anyway. So at nearly 1 a.m, we found ourselves sitting in the emergency department. The doctor asked what happened. I panicked. I slipped while cleaning the shower. The second the words left my mouth, I realized how ridiculous they sounded. Who cleans a shower at 1 a.m? The nurse gave me a look that suggested she had heard every excuse imaginable. She didn't say anything, just nodded. I ended up needing a few stitches. Nothing major, just enough to remind me of my poor life choices every time I look at my arm. The worst part is that now I have to explain the broken shower screen to our landlord. And yes, the story will remain that I slipped while cleaning, no matter how unbelievable that sounds. My husband has promised he'll take the truth to his grave. Although judging by how often he's retelling the story to himself while laughing, I don't have much confidence in that promise. The good news? I'm fine. The bad news? I have become the funniest story in my husband's collection forever. Every time he looks at the bathroom, he starts smiling. Every time I see the stitches, I remember exactly what happened. And every time someone tells me to be careful in the shower, I have to fight the urge to laugh. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to end up in a situation like this. If someone had told me a year ago that I would be sitting awake at 3 a.m., staring at my ceiling and questioning every decision I'd ever made because of one night, I would have laughed. And yet, here I am. The worst part is that I don't even know who I'm more afraid of hurting, my best friend, his family, or myself. For context, I'm 23 years old, and my best friend, who I'll call John, is 21. We've known each other since our first year of university. At first, we were just classmates who happened to sit near each other during lectures. Eventually, we started studying together, then hanging out outside of class, and before I knew it, he had become one of the most important people in my life. The kind of friend you call when something good happens. The kind of friend you call when something terrible happens. The kind of friend who feels more like family than some actual relatives. Over the years, I got to know his family too, and that's where things become complicated. John's mother, Sarah, always treated me like I belonged there. I lost my own mother when I was very young. It's something I've carried with me my entire life. There are moments that make you realize you're missing something everyone else seems to have. Birthdays, graduations, family holidays, sometimes even simple conversations. So when Sarah welcomed me into their family with open arms, it meant more to me than she probably realized. Whenever I visited, she'd ask how I was doing. She'd make sure I'd eaten. She remembered small details about my life. She listened when I talked. She cared. Over time, she became someone I deeply respected, someone I trusted, someone who made me feel less alone. At the beginning of the year, John invited me to spend New Year's with his family. I immediately accepted. I wasn't particularly excited about spending the holiday by myself, and I didn't have much interest in traveling back home due to some personal family issues. So spending it with people I cared about sounded perfect. The evening started normally. There was food, music, family friends, drinks, The usual New Year's celebration. Everyone was having a good time. As the night went on, people drank more, laughed louder, and became increasingly emotional, like people often do when one year ends and another begins. Around midnight, everyone celebrated together. We hugged, made resolutions we'd probably never keep, talked about the future. Eventually, guests began leaving one by one. John had been drinking heavily all night and ended up completely passed out on the couch. The house gradually became quieter. By the time most people had gone home, only Sarah and I were still awake. Neither of us seemed ready to call it a night. So we sat in the living room talking. At first it was casual conversation, then somehow it became deeper. We talked about life, about regrets, about relationships, about growing older, about loneliness, about dreams that never quite turned out the way we imagined. Hours passed without either of us noticing. I remember feeling unusually comfortable. It felt like one of those rare conversations where you completely forget about time, the kind where you feel truly understood. As the night continued, the emotional distance between us seemed to disappear. Looking back now, I can see all the warning signs, but at the time, everything felt natural, comfortable, safe. Eventually, things crossed a line they never should have crossed, a line neither of us had ever planned to cross. And by the time reality caught up with us, it was already too late. The next morning was one of the most uncomfortable mornings of my life. I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a truck, not because of the alcohol, because of the realization. For a few moments, I just stared at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that maybe I'd imagined everything. Unfortunately, reality was waiting for me. I quietly got up and walked outside to the balcony. I lit a cigarette with shaking hands. My mind was racing. Questions kept repeating themselves over and over. What have I done? How did this happen? What happens now? A little later, Sarah joined me. Neither of us knew what to say. The silence was unbearable. Eventually, she broke it. She said something that immediately made my stomach drop. John could never know. Not because she hated him. Quite the opposite. Because she loved him. Because she knew exactly how badly it would hurt him. And honestly, she was right. John adored his mother. Their relationship was incredibly close. The thought of being responsible for destroying that relationship made me feel sick. I left shortly afterward, and for a while I convinced myself I could simply move on, pretend it never happened, act normal, continue being friends. But life isn't that simple. The guilt followed me everywhere. Every text message from John made me feel awful. Every invitation to hang out made me uncomfortable. Every family dinner became a reminder of what happened. 2 months have passed, and instead of getting easier, it's getting harder. John still has no idea. He still trusts me completely. He still considers me one of his closest friends. And that's exactly what makes this so painful. Because every time he laughs with me, every time he tells me something personal, every time he talks about his family, I feel like I'm carrying around a secret that gets heavier every single day. What's even worse is that I genuinely care about both of them. I never wanted to hurt anyone. I never intended for any of this to happen. But intentions don't erase consequences. Now I'm stuck between two terrible choices. Tell the truth and potentially destroy relationships that have existed for decades. Or keep the secret and live with the guilt of knowing I've betrayed someone's trust. Some days I convince myself that silence is the right answer. Other days I feel like honesty is the only answer. And honestly, I still don't know which one is worse. This happened yesterday, and judging by the way my wife looked at me this morning, I'm probably not going to be allowed to forget it anytime soon. For context, my wife and I have been married for several years. We have kids, a house, and a pretty normal family life. My mother-in-law also lives with us, which is generally great because she helps out a lot around the house, and the kids absolutely adore her. Usually, our household runs pretty smoothly. Usually. Yesterday was not one of those days. The whole disaster started with what seemed like a completely innocent text message while I was at work. My phone buzzed, and I saw a message from my wife. Hey, did you know the TV in the kitchen is showing family photos as a screensaver? I glanced at the message and thought absolutely nothing of it. Oh, that's kind of cool, I thought. I assumed the TV had automatically connected to our shared photo account and started displaying random family pictures. You know, vacations, birthdays, pictures of the kids, the dog, normal family stuff. I replied with something along the lines of, "Huh, neat," and went back to work. If I had known what was about to happen, I would have immediately driven home and unplugged every television in the house. About 30 minutes later, my phone rang. It was my wife. The moment I answered, I knew something was wrong. Very wrong. She wasn't greeting me. She wasn't asking how my day was going. She was yelling, "What did you save in our photos?" Now that's not exactly the kind of question you want to hear in the middle of a workday. Completely confused, I asked what she was talking about. She then explained what had happened. Apparently, my mother-in-law had been standing at the kitchen sink washing dishes while the TV continued cycling through photos. Family picture, vacation picture, kids at the park, birthday cake. Then suddenly, not a family picture, not a vacation picture, not anything that should ever appear on a giant television mounted in a family kitchen. A private photo that I had originally sent to my wife had somehow made its way into the shared photo collection. And because the screensaver was displaying images one after another on a 49-inch screen, my mother-in-law got a front row seat she definitely didn't ask for. For a few seconds, I couldn't even process what my wife was saying. Then it hit me, and I immediately started laughing. Not because it was funny for anyone involved. Well, maybe a little because it was funny. Mostly because it was such an unbelievably ridiculous situation that my brain didn't know how else to react. My wife, however, was not laughing at all. She was absolutely mortified. While she was explaining the situation, I could hear another voice in the background, my mother-in-law, and to my surprise, she was laughing. Hard. That somehow made everything worse. My wife was furious. My mother-in-law was laughing. I was trying unsuccessfully to stop laughing myself. The entire phone call was a disaster. Eventually, I finished work and drove home. The entire ride there, I kept wondering how awkward dinner was about to be. Would nobody mention it? Would everyone pretend it never happened? Would my mother-in-law avoid me forever? Would my wife file for divorce? All possibilities seemed equally likely. The moment I walked through the front door, I could feel the tension. The house was unusually quiet. The kids were completely unaware that anything had happened, thankfully, but the adults definitely knew. Dinner felt like one of those painfully awkward scenes from a sitcom. Everyone was sitting there trying to act normal. Nobody wanted to be the first person to mention it. Finally, I decided to break the silence. I looked over at my mother-in-law and casually asked, "So, how was your day?" The second the words left my mouth, we both lost it. We started laughing so hard we could barely breathe, which unfortunately did not improve my wife's mood at all. She gave both of us a look that clearly communicated that she wasn't ready to find any of this funny yet. Dinner continued, awkwardly, very awkwardly. Eventually, my wife went to bed early. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law and I spent the rest of the evening avoiding eye contact because every time we looked at each other, one of us would start laughing again. The first thing I did afterward was dive into every setting on that television and permanently disable the photo screensaver feature. I don't care if it was displaying masterpieces from the Louvre. That feature is never being activated again. The good news is that everyone survived. The bad news is that I now have a family story that will probably be brought up at every holiday gathering for the next 20 years. And knowing my mother-in-law, she's absolutely going to tell the story to future grandchildren someday.